I'm going to be doing a quick video on how to use the bone rigging system in TOONSQUID because I didn't have a guide and I was literally losing my mind trying to figure out, so let's go. With the bone system, one thing to note is that adding bones on one layer isn't going to give you the movement that you actually want to get from it. You're going to separate all the different parts like how you would separate it if you're doing it for tweening. If you don't separate the parts, you're not really going to get that smooth movement and bending that you want to get. So I would suggest separating everything because if you don't, it's just going to move really weird. It's gonna look really funky. When you're separating, think about how you would separate it, like if you were tweening. So like if you would have, in this example, like have the different hair strands, you're gonna separate all the different hair strands so that they're separate by themselves. Once you get everything separated, you can actually start adding the bones on there. Since I'm doing hair for this specific video because of the animation I was doing, you'll add, I only added 2, but you can add more, but I would suggest doing 2 if you're doing hair. The first one is going to be for the movement for the top, second one for the bottom. When using the bones, like I said, you're going to think about as if you were tweening, because tweening is pretty much the closest similar system to using the bones. You will have to separate layers and you'll have to separate it into different parts because the way the bone system works, it'll just be easier for it to be done that way. And it's just easier because much like tweening, you're moving it around and it's just easier to have it all separated instead of all in the same thing. Like for an example, like if you're animating something and it has like arms, that arm would be separate and that would have its own separate layer and bones to it. Based on TOONSQUID's own video, it doesn't explain or show a good example of a bone rig. Any part you may want to move on its own must be separated by layer. You can still add layers and groups to the hierarchy so the parts stay connected to each other. Once your hierarchy is made, make sure the parts are connected to each other based on what the parent layer is. Failure to do so may result in some parts not being properly positioned. Once you do that though, you don't have to worry about moving each layer. Now that you've learned the basic info, you can get to work and start moving the bones on each part. Now, there are still things to know. When you put your first bone down, that is the bone that will control the rest of them. So any bones after that will be connected to the first bone and its position. Another thing to know is that you can change the position of the bones, but be careful as this will reposition the other bones on the bone hierarchy. An example would be if you moved B1, which would be bone 1, which is your first bone, the other bones will follow that current position of B1. One thing I'd like to note is that the IK or the IK target, which is a tool that's part of the bone rig tool, it's basically pointless because its whole function, which is to move other bones to specific bones on the bone hierarchy, isn't really needed, and it just adds more complex issues and problems, so you really don't have to worry about that. Now with all the basics out of the way, now that you've got everything figured out, you'll be able to start rigging. So when you're rigging, you'll move each bone and use keyframing to animate similar to tweening. And that is pretty much how you use the new bone rigging system in TOONSQUID. It took me several days to actually figure out this entire system, and when I finally figured it out, I just knew I had to make a video because, like me and other artists, I like using TOONSQUID a lot. So hopefully this helped. I might make more videos in the future, but I don't know yet. We'll see.